to order. We're going to revert without objection to the introduction and first reading of House Files. Clerk will report the House Files.
Introduction and first reading of House Files 3392 through 3396.
First reading House Files 3392 to 3396. Messages. Message from the Senate.
Message from the Senate. This is the Melin motion. Mr. Speaker, I hereby announce the Senate has concurred in and adopted the report of the Conference Committee on Senate File 2470, an act relating to education. Conference Committee report is the address to the Honorable Sandra L. Pappas, President of the Senate, the Honorable Paul Thiessen, Speaker of the House. We, the undersigned conferees for Senate File 2470, report that we've agreed upon the items in dispute and recommend as follows. The report signed by 2 of the 3 conferees on the part of the Senate and all 3 conferees on the part of the House. Melin moves that the report of the Conference Committee on Senate File 2470 be adopted and that the bill be repassed as amended by the Conference Committee.
Representative Melin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members, and that is my motion that we repass Senate File 2470 as amended by the Conference Committee. Members, this is the medical cannabis bill that we passed about a couple of weeks ago. I want to start out by thanking my House conferees, Representative Hamilton and Representative Murphy E., for the work that went into Conference Committee and coming out with a good, strong Conference Committee report. Also, thank the senators, Senator Dibble and Senator Laurie, for the work that they did in Conference Committee. I want to thank Jamie Olson from Nonpartisan House Research, who did a tremendous job in working with us over this session, really, in fine-tuning this language, and especially leading up to Conference Committee to come out with a really solid plan that we have in front of us today. Members, I just want to briefly go through the changes that were made to the bill from when it left the House floor to when we signed the Conference Committee report. One of those changes would be that we went from 1 manufacturer statewide to 2 manufacturers, again, that have to be registered and regulated by the Commissioner of Health. We went from 3 distribution sites statewide to a total of 8 distribution sites statewide that, again, are registered and regulated by the Department of Health. The location of those distribution sites have to take into account geographic location to ensure patient access. We also added additional criminal and civil penalties that came from the Senate language as far as diversion of the medical cannabis goes. So some enhanced criminal penalties for the patient as well as for the manufacturer or any employee of the manufacturer if any of the medical cannabis is diverted. We also added additional background check language for caregivers and for employees. Members, we also added terminal illness as a qualifying condition. If one of the symptoms of terminal illness is chronic or severe pain, severe nausea, or severe wasting. There was also a number of technical changes that were made, but the substance of the bill remains similar to what we passed off the House floor in that it's a patient registry model. That patients have to be enrolled through the program once their practitioner determines they have a qualifying condition, and then they register with the Department of Health, and there's very strict monitoring of those patients. It's the same delivery methods that left the House floor and the same form of medical cannabis, the pill, liquid, or oil, and the ability to vaporize is also still included in the bill. So those are the substantive changes, and I'd be happy to answer any questions, but I would ask for members' support.
Representative Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Melin yield to a question?
She will. Representative Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Melin, why did you never change the title? Because now when this bill is sent to the governor, as far as I can understand, it will become a new chapter with the title, A Bill Relating to Education, etc., etc., because you do nothing about changing it until you get into the text of the proposal of this, what will become new law. So would you explain that to me, please, and to the body?
Representative Melin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Erickson. It is changed on the last page of the conference committee report. You'll see that change. Thank you.
Representative Gruenhagen.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Speaker, members. Would the author yield for a couple quick questions?
She will. Representative Gruenhagen.
Representative Melin, where's the MMA on this bill and law enforcement?
Representative Melin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Gruenhagen. The position of law enforcement and the MMA on the bill that passed the House floor was neutrality, and their position on the conference committee report remains neutrality.
Representative Gruenhagen.
Well, thank you, Representative Melin, and thank you for working on the bill and putting the restrictions and stuff. I know it's been a controversial and a lot of work path that you've done, so I do appreciate that. I don't want to cover old ground from the previous discussion we had, but there is one additional concern that came up, and it has to do with how medical marijuana might interact with other prescription drugs. Again, I'm not a doctor, but my understanding is when somebody gets a prescription drug, the doctor takes into consideration what are the drugs they're taking to make sure there's not a negative reaction. And my understanding is that type of research has not been done with medical marijuana. And so the concern is that we will have if I understand correctly, the doctor will simply sign a slip that he has a qualifying event, they have to go to a dispenser to collect, but there's really no check and balance against what medications he's on, how that will react with with medical marijuana, and what the negative effects might be. And so if you'd respond to that.
Representative Melin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Gruenhagen, and you bring up a good point, which is why I think we're going to gain some really valuable information from this patient registry approach. Part of the healthcare practitioner's duties, as outlined on page 10 and 11, are pretty similar to what passed the House floor, if not the same, that requires the patient to have an ongoing relationship with their practitioner, and actually requires the practitioner to report to the Department of Health on how that individual patient is responding to the use of medical cannabis, including what other prescription drugs they may be on for their qualifying condition. And so I think that's one reason that this approach has value, in that we will start getting information on how medical cannabis interacts with other prescription drugs and how a patient with these qualifying conditions respond to the treatment of medical cannabis.
Representative Gruenhagen.
Oh, thank you for that response, Representative Melin. The last question I have is that if there would be a negative reaction between the medical marijuana and current prescriptions, who would be liable? Would the doctor be liable? Would we as the state be liable? Or is there limits and exceptions as far as the bill is concerned?
Representative Melin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Gruenhagen. And I know you had asked these similar questions when we had the language on the House floor. And, the patient is required to assume some risk associated with entry into the patient registry. When the doctor certifies that they have a qualifying condition, the doctor has to advise the patient of known risks or benefits or potential side effects of the use of medical cannabis. So the patient has all that information, and then the patient does assume risk in entering this program. The state is not liable, and there is some liability protections in the statute, with this sort of approach, there is an assumption of risk by the patient.
The final comment is, based on our previous discussion, Representative Barrett brought up about FDA trials that were beginning, and I just think we're putting the cart before the horse a little bit. I'll listen to the rest of the discussion, but we're going outside the norm. None of us are medical experts that conduct clinical trials and understand all the ramifications. And we're a little bit just taking the public and saying, hope this works out for you. And I have a lot of consternation. I'll listen to the rest of the discussion. I appreciate the efforts and restrictions that are in the bill, but I think we seriously need to think through what are our qualifications to approve new medical treatment compared to the established procedures that are in place. Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members.
Seeing no further discussion on the motion to adopt the conference committee report, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, no. The motion prevails. Clerk will give the bill its third reading as amended by conference.
Third reading, Senate File 2470, as amended by conference.
Third reading. Representative Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Melin, for your leadership on this, and also to the Majority Leader. I appreciated serving on the conference committee. I was asked to ask a few questions just on clarification once again. As far as protections for the employers, for Representative Melin, would yield for a question, please.
She will. Representative Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Melin, we talked about this to make sure that there was protections for all the stakeholders, if you will. And there are provisions in here in the event somebody is able to use medicinal cannabis and they're working on the job. There is indeed protections for the employer in the event they happen to be impaired or offer up safeguards or whatever in case they're operating heavy machinery, etc. Am I correct about that? If she would yield.
Representative Melin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Hamilton. Yes, there are limitations in the bill, including that no one is able to be impaired and operate any sort of motor vehicle, either at the workplace or not at the workplace, and there are protections in place for both the employee and the employer as far as their status as a patient in the registry.
And
Representative Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and that was my interpretation as well. I just wanted to get it on record here from the author too. So once again, thank you so much for allowing me to be a part of that. Thank you for your leadership, and I ask for your support.
Representative Lomer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, thank you, Representative Melin, for your work on this. I do appreciate and understand how everyone in this room is concerned about compassionate care of people who are suffering. But I do fear that we are walking down a road of political correctness here, and with an idea to pass something out of compassion that is not really going to promise to necessarily help people. For sure, we don't know that. So I have a couple questions. I've been thinking about this a lot since the last discussion. I've been thinking about how if I go into my medicine cabinet at home and I look at any medications that are there, there's a box and there's a bottle and then there's paper, and on the paper there is dosages for, maybe if you're under 2 years old, you're to contact a physician. From 3 to 5, you take this much. From 6 up, you take this much. An adult, you take this much. If you weigh something, you take this much. We do that for everything, from a Tylenol to an Oxycontin that we get from the pharmacist. But with this, medical marijuana, if Representative Melin, if you could yield to a question, is there any, or who is responsible for dosing this, and who is responsible for knowing, if I have a child that's 3 years old that is having seizures, how do I know how much to give that child, in what form, how much they weigh? Can you help me understand that, please?
Representative Melin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Lomer. If you look at page 13 and 14 of the conference committee report, it goes through what the duties are of the manufacturer, and we actually require that the manufacturer employ licensed pharmacists, and the pharmacists do determine the dosage for each individual patient in consultation with that patient, and each patient is only allowed a 30-day dosage. So what you described with the requirement of the label and what the dosing is, etc., for each patient is exactly what we do in this bill as far as the administration of the medical cannabis.
Representative Lomer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Melin, are the pharmacists in favor of this particular bill?
Representative Melin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Lomer. I don't know what the position of the Board of Pharmacy is on this particular bill, but I can tell you that they helped draft the language as far as what the involvement would be with the pharmacist and the patient.
Representative Lomer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Melin. Okay, I was looking at the bill earlier, and I'm curious. Okay, now I'm going back to having this 3-year-old child, and my doctor recommends that maybe because of the seizures that are not under control, I might want to try medical marijuana for my child. How does the dispensary know what type of medications that my child is taking and the interactions? I think I understood that its medical records go to the dispensary. Is that correct? If you would yield again.
Representative Melin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Lomer. The medical records as far as the underlying treatment of the qualifying condition, and including what other meds the patient may be on, go to the Department of Health as far as the patient registry. The manufacturer is required to upload the information to the patient registry for what compounds are in the medical cannabis, what their dosing is on a monthly basis, and so that's all kept in the same patient registry with a identification number for each individual patient.
Representative Lomer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Melin. Well, I could go on and on with these questions. I'll just stop because I'm just really concerned about how this process works, because we don't have any studies or any proven methods of knowing really what works for who at what level. And I think you might all remember, if you read, I sent you an article from USA Today, I think last Friday, where people in Colorado are ingesting medical marijuana, and it's not giving them the effect, and so they're taking more, to the point where people are getting seriously ill, and I think there was even a death reported. So I'm just really concerned that we are developing a state, or like the state guinea pigs. We're basically just saying, well, we're just going to try this and see how it works, and we're just going to try these different doses and see how it works. And I think that is the opposite of compassion, actually. I mean, where's the compassion if someone overdoses? Where's the compassion if there's long-term permanent damage to someone for side effects? Because we don't know. We just don't know. And there's no other drugs that we do this with in our country. And I just don't feel that that's really compassionate. I don't feel it's responsible. I feel like we're making decisions here based on emotional feelings and instead of science. And I don't think that's a responsible governing measure. So I'm also concerned about measures in the bill that would protect the physician. So if the physician tells someone to go and they get the medical marijuana and they do have a problem, is there any protection on the doctor for any kind of medical malpractice in this bill? And if Representative Melin would yield again to that question, please.
She will yield. Representative Melin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Lomer. I mean, first of all, I want to address some of the comments about how, supposedly every other FDA-approved drug is safe, and we know that because it goes through a process. 16,000 Americans die every year from overdoses from FDA-approved drugs. These kids, for example, with seizure disorders, many of them have tried up to 20 FDA-approved drugs. they're approved, but not for kids really that young, usually for kids over 12 years old. So their parents and doctors are already having to go outside the bounds and try to do something for these kids. The side effects to some of those FDA-approved drugs include their liver and kidney shutting down. It includes brittle bones, and sometimes the side effect is even death. So I just want to address some of those concerns that, somehow going through the FDA approval process is a safeguard when we know that there are a lot of major side effects associated with lots of prescription drugs in this country. In regards to the doctor liability, just so you know, under the structure of the bill, the doctor certifies that the patient has a qualifying medical condition in the bill. So either cancer, glaucoma, MS, epilepsy, simply diagnoses them with that condition. They then enroll in the program through the Minnesota Department of Health. So the doctor isn't directly administering them the medicine. That's not how the doctor-patient relationship works in any regard. And so, as I mentioned earlier with Representative Gruenhagen's questions, there is an assumption of risk that the patient is undergoing when entering into this program, just as many patients undergo when they enter into a clinical trial, when the results of the impact of the drug are maybe unknown. And the doctor is protected from liability as far as reporting to the Department of Health on how the patient is responding to this sort of medication. But it's my belief that traditional medical malpractice laws would still apply.
Representative Lomer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I'll finish up here. I think it's risky because the way it sounds, the doctor is still the one that is going to be recommending, and so if things go wrong, it just seems to me that in our legal system that could be a problem for them. And they're going to be continuing to follow. You say that they're going to be reporting. So I think that is a really big concern, and it's probably no surprise I can't support this bill. Thank you.
Representative Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, I rise in support of Representative Melin's medical cannabis bill. And Representative Melin, I got to tell you, I think it was Representative Hamilton, I think I heard him say something like, consider me a flip-flopper on this issue. I might be wrong on that, but I thought I heard that. And I have, and I've never voted for this either. And I, so I guess I'm a flip-flopper too on this issue. But, members, let me just tell you a couple quick scenarios. And I think I've shared this before. I wasn't able to share it last Friday because I was gone, but I did visit I shared this in the Rules Committee. I did visit, and Representative Melin, I've talked to you about this situation. I did visit with a family over Easter break has a young child with a terrible debilitating illness that this little child is suffering with. And I had a nice long visit with this family, and I finally met this little boy named Lincoln. And when you visit with a family, and a lot of you have seen those kids at these committee meetings as well, and when you visit with those families, your whole perspective kind of changes, and you try to gather in your mind, maybe there's something that we can do to help here. And Representative Lomer, I totally understand what you're saying. You and I have been working on a teen challenge issues in the past, and I get that perspective as well. And so when you visit with these kids and with these families, and they are at their end rope with trying to find something, it really, for me anyhow, opened my mind up and in trying to provide maybe some hope and some actual help. And I got to tell you, one of my constituents is a family that moved to Colorado. There's a little sweet little girl in that family. my wife and daughter, who are speech clinicians, worked with, and they daily witnessed this sweet little girl having devastating effects on her life with the condition that she had. They moved to Colorado, and I just got an email from one of their family members that this little girl who's participating in the study out in Colorado, her seizures have been reduced significantly. She's coming around. She's really bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and she's, it's really had a great impact and positive effect on her. And I listened to my wife and my daughter talk about this sweet little girl as she was going to school, and they were working in speech and language with this young girl, and she's now able to do so many things that she was not able to do. I've got a brother-in-law that's a doctor, medical doctor, my wife's brother, and continually we have this dialogue about medical cannabis, and I know the MMA has been flip-flop as well. And and my brother-in-law read both bills, and he's very wise in everything that he does, and he himself said that your bill, Representative Melin, and with the alternatives that you have come back with, is probably a good way to proceed with this. And I talked to my law enforcement as well, and they have also said initially there was no, definitely no, and now it's like Representative Melin said, it's more neutral. And so, Representative Melin, I applaud your efforts. Representative Hamilton, everybody in this, Representative Aaron Murphy on the conference committee, everybody in this House, as Representative Abler said this morning, we really try to make a difference. And sometimes we have to take risks. Sometimes, as part of this deal, we have to take risks sometimes in order to see what happens. And Representative Melin, I think this is the right way to go. And so, but I do have a question, if you'll yield to one question, Representative Melin. And and in the Rules Committee, I offered an amendment to not extend the methods, and we accepted that, and it's kind of stayed that way, pretty much. I did not offer the amendment to prohibit the extended categorical illnesses. And what I want to know is, I talked about a couple. I talked about a couple visits that I had, and a couple personal stories that I have with this issue. And I know some of the victims are not going to be able to participate in this. And so, Representative Melin, my question is, some of the people that are not in the categorical list right now, in your opinion, as we move forward with this, is this a done deal? Those people will never have a chance or an opportunity, perhaps in the future, to participate and see if it'll help their loved ones as well? I mean, and I know you can't predict that, but could you maybe just address that? So in the future, will maybe other people with other illnesses, as we move forward and find out, Representative Hamilton, what can do and what can't do, and what dosages, Representative Lomer, and those people that maybe were not able to be in this first initial list, maybe be looked at in the future, Representative Melin.
Representative Melin.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and Representative Ward. And yes, we do allow language for the Commissioner to be able to add medical conditions in the future. And I know specifically, people with intractable pain or intractable nausea, which I know that you have a constituent whose son faces some of those symptoms. We actually did put language in the bill on the House floor when it came through saying that intractable pain was the first thing that the Commissioner needed to look at when determining what conditions to add to qualify. And, we wanted to do that to address some concerns that you raised, that as the research goes on, as we gather more data, as we know how people are responding to certain symptoms or how certain conditions are responding, that we wanted the Commissioner of Health to be able to add additional qualifying conditions. I know that in other states they have that same provision, and as a result of that they have been able to add more qualifying conditions. So, my hope is that we start out with this, and that people who need help are able to get it, and then those who need help who aren't able to get it under the current qualifying conditions are hopefully able to be added in the future.
Representative Ward.
Thank you, Representative Melin, for that insight and that answer. And members, this is really a step in the right direction, in my opinion, and I'd encourage a green vote for all those folks that maybe perhaps this could help in the future. Thank you very much.
The member from Olmsted, Representative Quam.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and members. Frankly, I have a lot of respect for pharmacists. My son worked as a pharmacy tech for a while, and I've talked and met with some of them. But I also understand that, there's a PDR. Well, it's on a disc or discs now, or online. It's not the big, thick books that we were used to having come out. But that's a reference that pharmacists use, and I have yet to find good documentation of cannabis in there with the interactions. One thing I am familiar with is that in most of the PDR entries, they have degrees of side effects. They have interactions, and sometimes it's multiple things together in order to get their interaction. And they also have ones that are very rare. We're getting so good now that you can take genetic tests to understand which interferon will work best for your MS and other conditions. But frankly, without having the reference for the pharmacists, PDR entries, and the problem is probably from the federal level and other issues, it's tough for every pharmacist to sort of understand what the true possible implications are. It's been stated that FDA-approved drugs, we've had overdoses, we've had interactions, we've had issues, and I know we've had deaths. But because there have been problems is not an excuse to not do and take the appropriate cautions in order to prevent issues when we try something new. I have looked over, and maybe I missed it, but I don't see the specialists involved and listed, the cross-functional specialists that could monitor. Because in a normal study, it's not just the drug, other drugs you might be on. It gets into what food are you eating. In some cases, it's hours of exposure in the sun. I mean, there are a lot of environmental things that can impact, and without having a strong basic research foundation, there's a lot of what-ifs. Now, I understand the need, and I am very sympathetic with the desire. I just have some ill-at-ease issues with some of the implementations and the safety and oversight and etc. with this. So I'm not going to form it as a question, but if in the summation the author can explain that there's something similar to a PDR that the pharmacists can reference, and what type of cross-functional specialists, those type of things to give us a little more at ease, with this brave new adventure and journey we're going to go into. Thank you.
The member from Pope, Representative Anderson.
Thanks, Madam Speaker and members. I have a question on the distribution system with this in this new area of medicine here in Minnesota. And Representative Melin, as I recall in debate on the original bill when it passed off the floor last week or whenever that was, And being we only had, I think, 2 or 3 distribution centers for the entire state, and being this is a big state, I think you mentioned that there may be a method for some type of home delivery for the medical cannabis. If that's correct, could you just give me a yes or a no, or respond to that if you would?
She will yield. Representative Melin.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and Representative Anderson. We actually did increase the distribution sites to 8 in this bill. It was 3 when it came off the House floor, and it does have to account for geographic diversity for patient access. Additionally, we do allow, as we did in the version that came off the House floor, for a caregiver to be provided for people who are unable to administer medication for themselves or unable to drive to get to a distribution site, that they have a registered caregiver through the Department of Health who goes through a background check and is able to assist that patient in accessing the medication that they need.
Representative Anderson.
Thanks again, Madam Speaker. Yeah, in the bill it says that it can only be distributed by a licensed pharmacist. So in the case of a delivery system, would that have to be done by that pharmacist if it were a home delivery type of system?
Representative Melin.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and Representative Anderson. No, the home delivery system isn't in the conference committee report. There was a system similar to that in the version that came off the House floor, but in this case the designated caregiver is able to access the medication for the patient.
The member from Washington, Representative Dean.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Would Representative Melin yield for a question?
She will. Representative Dean.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Melin. And I've been looking at your bill, and I just have a couple of questions about some changes that were made between the last time it was on the floor and this time. And I want to ask you a little bit about that, and also about want to ask you about the duties of the commissioner, the changes in sites, and the overall scope in the study. And I'm going to start out there with the overall scope in the study. This bill has been portrayed as a medical study that the state of Minnesota is going to embark upon with a report back similar to what we would have for clinical trials for drugs through the NIH or other organizations. And I'm just interested in that, and I'm wondering, has there ever been another state that has done their own clinical trial for a drug like this? And if so or not, what kinds of deliverable report or product might come out of this study when we're completed with that, and what might the time frames be, Representative Melin?
Representative Melin.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and Representative Dean. This is not a clinical trials method. This is an observational research patient registry, which from my understanding the Department of Health does for other conditions, immunizations, for example. They keep a patient registry on, and that's to gather information on how patients are responding to certain medications in this case, and so that they can gather data and research on what works best for the underlying conditions, what the correct dosing is for the underlying conditions, and they can use that research going forward in making public health decisions. So I anticipate that that's what kind of research will come out of this study. We do have a task force in the bill that's required to report back to the legislature on some of the results that patients are having in the study. So I would not categorize it as a clinical trials approach, but more an observational research study. And that's due to some of the concerns we addressed before when this bill was on the House floor regarding our obstacles with federal law.
Representative Dean.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And with Representative Melin would yield for another question. I think what the Commissioner of Health was concerned about when we talked about going from one distribution site to many was the difficulty in comparing results from one site to another site. If we have multiple sites around the state, that you're not going to be able to get any data that you can compare one site to another, because you're going to have a different way of producing it, you're going to have different products, and that is going to reduce any kind of material value of any kind of study or any kind of data that comes out of this if we have multiple sites. I know that was something that the Commissioner brought up initially. And now what I would like to do, Representative Melin, is ask you a little bit about the conditions for the pre-qualifying conditions that I go to a doctor and I say that I have an ailment, or my child does, and how can I get referred to somebody who can give me marijuana? The doctor's not going to do that. I'm going to go to one of these government distribution sites. How I'm going to do that. Could you talk a little bit about the qualifying conditions, the list of conditions, and changes that were made within the conference committee, and how that changed specifically moving forward?
Representative Melin.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and Representative Dean. And just first to address the distribution sites issue. So just for clarity, there's still only 2 manufacturers authorized in the state, but 8 distribution sites. So those 8 distribution sites will not be manufacturing or cultivating any medical cannabis, which again gets to the consistency and quality control that the Commissioner of Health is looking for. Additionally, each manufacturer is required to have third-party lab testing to ensure that we know what compounds are in the medication, and that's all uploaded as well. So those same sort of quality control and consistency concerns that the Commissioner had earlier mentioned are addressed through the fact that we limit it to 2 manufacturers. They just happen to have a few more distribution sites. And then to your question, which I've now sort of forgotten. What? Qualifying conditions. Thank you. It's been a long day or night or however long we've been here. The qualifying conditions are the same, except that for cancer we added that if the underlying condition or treatment produces one or more of the following: severe or chronic pain, nausea or severe vomiting, or cachexia or severe wasting. We added that to the cancer qualification. The Commissioner actually said that he preferred that, but because we know that if somebody has minor skin cancer and has that removed and has no underlying symptoms that would need the treatment of medical cannabis, then they, for example, wouldn't qualify under the language that came out of the conference committee report. They would have qualified under the language that came out of the House bill. So we wanted to make sure that we were actually addressing the symptoms that people had. The only condition that we added in conference committee was terminal illness with the probable life expectancy of under 1 year. And again, if that illness or its treatment produces severe or chronic pain, nausea or severe vomiting, or the severe wasting. So other than terminal illness, that was the only condition that we added in conference committee.
Representative Dean.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and Representative Melin. I was very interested in this because I've looked at some other states that have kind of gone down this road, and I started out with California because that has a long history of medical marijuana, and they have looked at moving towards recreational, as many states have, from that progression from medical to recreational, and California is saying, hey, stop. Let's slow down. We've got some real problems here in California with distribution. I would just point out that as we look at California, I looked up their bill and I printed it out, and I just imagined their House chamber probably very much like this one, struggling with the same issue and trying to get medicine to children. And I read their list of qualifying conditions: acquired immunity deficiency syndrome, anorexia, arthritis, cancer, chronic pain, glaucoma, migraine, persistent muscle spasms, including but not limited to spasms associated with MS, seizures, including but not limited to some other epilepsy, other nausea, and other chronic pain. It looks very similar to the list that we have generated, but when you look at what happened to that list and how that actually implemented in California, if you fast forward to 2014, how's that working out for California? Their legislators were sitting just like you are, trying to help those kids. But I could point out that just one distribution center in California has 94,000 registered customers at one distribution center. They have $22 million in annual revenue. And this is not recreational, this is medicinal. $22 million and 94,000 customers from one site. I would also point out that in the years 1994 to 2011, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration has conducted a study that looked at deaths from vehicle deaths associated with marijuana, and over that time period it has actually doubled. And you have to say, what is the relationship between that and where we're going here? I don't know if driving under the influence in the state of Minnesota, if I take this as a medicine, let's say I have a persistent muscle spasm, because that is a qualifying condition that you are going to vote for. If I have a persistent muscle spasm, I can go to the doctor and I can get registered as a qualifying condition. I can go to one of these sites and I can get medicinal marijuana. I can get that, I can have that in my system, and it can impair me. It makes me unable to drive a car safely. I don't know how that works in this bill. I don't know how that works in this bill. And I hope somebody can fill me in, if the people in law enforcement can tell me how we're going to tell how this leaves the body and when people are safe to drive and when they're not safe to drive, or if you're taking this, how you know when you're safe to drive if you're taking this. So I'd like that answered. Also, I can tell you that I think that Representative Glomer hit the nail right on the head. When we're talking about compassion, we have to talk about unintended consequences down the road. And I would like you to think about a little boy named Adrian. And I would like to have you think about a little girl named Shakira Miracle Jones. Adrian was 5 weeks old. Shakira was 1 year old. Adrian and his mother was 22 years old, Tanya. And they were killed when they were hit by somebody who was under the influence of marijuana. Shakira was 1 year old. She was not strapped in. The person driving the car was under the influence of marijuana and was killed. There's a 19-year-old college student named Levi who was on spring break, and he found 2 marijuana cookies. And he was staying in a Holiday Inn, and he ate them both. He didn't know you were supposed to crack them into little pieces and only eat a portion of them because they didn't look like medicine, they looked like cookies. He began pulling things off of the wall. He acted very strange. His friends subdued him. They tried to get him calmed down. They calmed him down for a while. He jumped out of the 4-story window and he was killed. So when you think about this, think about those consequences and think about those kids down the road too, because the laws that we are making affect people like Levi and babies like Adrian and babies like Shakira. So I think that we need to think about this long term. And when we look at the way that this has worked in other states, we see that when you're looking at distribution, the push is towards more sites. When you look at conditions, and it's built right into this bill, the conditions are going to move to more conditions, and this just relies upon the Commissioner informing the chairs of the committees in the legislature that we're doing this. And it will push towards more methods of delivery, towards edibles, towards from vapor to smoke. That's the way it's going to go, and it's going to go from medicinal to recreational. That's the glide path. That's where we're moving. It's already set up in the bill. And so perhaps that's what frustrates me the most about this bill. It would frustrate me less if this were a recreational legalization. I probably wouldn't even speak on it because I don't know that much about how these drugs work or what you can qualify for or can't qualify for. If that's a policy decision, I think that that's a policy decision that should be made in the legislature. But I am so uncomfortable and so frustrated when we're trying to practice medicine and determine how to dose a 30-pound kid with seizures and a 190-pound man with a backache, and how we're going to put this through distribution center, and good, hardworking people are going to have to make these very difficult decisions that could very well result in the death of a child down the road. I'm very, very frustrated and concerned about that, and I'm very, very concerned about the safety moving forward and the precedent that we're setting. So with that, probably no surprise, have not been a supporter, not one currently, but I just wanted to share some of my thinking along these lines, and also perhaps a warning to future legislatures of where we're headed.
The member from Mahnomen, Representative Green.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I wasn't going to talk on this either. As you know, I don't talk very much on the floor. But there were some things said. Some of them were addressed. But it was noted that people have side effects and die from products that are already approved by FDA. But there is a difference there, that these products have been tested. And whether those products come through a doctor or are on the shelf at your pharmacy, the side effects are listed. And so the people who are taking those are forewarned well in advance that those side effects are there. This does not do that. We also have our studies that go on for drugs. I know that when my son was in college, he took prac studies. And that's where these drugs were tested. And they had to sign, and a responsible adult signed and said, and they were proven to be healthy before they took them. And they knew the consequences before they took them. This doesn't do that. I wasn't going to do this, but I'm going to tell you a story. I don't like emotional stories, but this is the story of a young man who was very close to me. And he grew up with my kids. And he was strong, healthy. He played football. When he was 19, he got a job in construction, and he loved it. He loved roofing. And only his closest friends knew this. His parents didn't. I didn't. That he started having pains. And because he was young and healthy, he didn't think he needed to go to the doctor. And one day his pains got very severe, and one of his friends, in an effort to help him, gave him some of their prescription painkillers because it worked on it helped them. They had a bad back. And what wasn't known was that this young man had a heart condition. And the cure ended up being more severe than the remedy, because he died. And he died because he took medication and nobody knew how it would affect him. He didn't know how it was going to affect him. We saw a lot of emotion on the floor last week over this issue. And what I'd like to tell you today is I hope you save some tears, because we've got unintended consequences coming at us. And even these mothers who visited me and I have sympathy for, we don't know if 5 or 10 years from now, they're going to be standing in a hospital room over a bed with their children who have experienced now kidney failure or liver failure or heart failure, Representative Zerwas. We don't know that. And we're pretending that we're doctors here, and we're pretending that we're scientists, but we're not. I'm very confident that this bill is going to pass, even though I'm not voting for it. And I only hope that we will continue to monitor what the FDA is coming out with on the study of these drugs, because they are studying them. I've looked up some of them. There's a couple that help that have been approved. One will be approved shortly. 2 more are in phase 2 and phase 3. 3 were tested and pulled because they caused suicidal thoughts, depression, and 1 just didn't do anything at all. We don't know if there's going to be brain damage because we don't have the testing for it. So I'm asking you to please think hard before you vote for this, because this is above our pay grade, guys. You know, I do carpenter work. For years I had a greenhouse. That was my expertise. And I know that we range everything from there to attorneys to everything else here. But we're not doctors. And I'm really uncomfortable with us playing doctors. And I urge a red vote.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Uglum.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, I too am very concerned about this bill. This is definitely breaking new ground, and I think we're all very, very concerned about the children and people that do need some type of remedy here. But obviously, we could be opening Pandora's box here in terms of some major problems. But I'm also concerned about the way the bill is written in the process, and I have a lot of questions about that, because I think one of the author's intents has been to have a good controlled process here. And I think that's correct, because we are dealing with essentially a drug. So, Madam Chair, would the author yield for a couple of questions?
She will yield. Representative Uglum.
Representative Melin, in terms of the process and the control here, could you just walk us through a little bit about a typical patient on a typical day coming to the doctor and going through the process from the doctor's visit to the prescription by the pharmacy, to the distribution, to the rest of the refill of the prescription and things like that? I'm not totally clear on the process top to bottom and the controls that we have in it. Could you just do that for me?
Representative Melin.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and Representative. I would like to remind the body that we're on the conference committee report. So there's been a lot of discussion and several questions that were in the bill that already passed the floor. I thought we were going to be talking more on the differences between what had left the floor in the conference committee report. So I just wanted to remind you of that. But I will walk you through the process, which is substantially the same as the House bill that passed the floor last week. And that is that a patient is diagnosed with a qualifying medical condition. So you're diagnosed with cancer, or you're diagnosed with HIV/AIDS, or you're diagnosed with ALS. And you then enter into the patient registry program with the Department of Health. You provide the Department of Health with the certification that you have a qualifying medical condition as diagnosed by a physician or an advanced nurse practitioner. And the commissioner registers you in the program if you have that qualifying condition. You then are able to access medical cannabis through the manufacturer, and the pharmacist employed there helps determine the dosing based on information posted by the Department of Health as far as what could respond to that qualifying medical condition. And once you're in the program and you're receiving treatment of medical cannabis, you're required to have ongoing care from your practitioner, and your practitioner uploads information into the patient registry regarding how you're responding to that treatment. So the conference committee report is the same as the House bill that left this floor in that regard.
Representative Uglum.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Would the author yield for one further question?
She will yield. Representative Uglum.
Representative Melin, when this bill left the House floor, we had quite a bit of limited distribution, and now we have more distribution points. What is the reasoning behind that, and do you feel that we could lose some type of control in terms of keeping the drug out of the hands of people that shouldn't use it?
Representative Melin.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and Representative. As you know, we went into conference committee with the Senate. The bill that left the House floor had 3 distribution sites, and the Senate bill had 55 distribution sites. And so as conference committee goes, we agreed on a number that was greater than what had left the House floor and fewer than what had left the Senate floor. We also did want to address geographic access. This is a big state. It takes a lot of time to drive from the northern end of the state to the southern end, or from the eastern end to the western end. So we wanted to make sure that patients had access. There are very strict security measures in place for the distribution sites. I think in that regard we are addressing law. I know in that regard we're addressing law enforcement's concerns, public safety concerns regarding the access points, which is why we were able to land on the number 8. But you know, we're talking about people with some very serious medical conditions, and they're only allowed 30-day dosing, so they're going to be traveling a lot in order to get their medication. I mean, typically you're allowed 90-day dosing if you go to the pharmacy to get any other drug. So with the 30-day dosing, they're going to be needing to travel a lot in order to access their medication, so we wanted to ensure that they had greater access and we did so by adding the additional distribution points.
Representative Uglum.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I just really hope. I think there's a lot of good points in this bill, and obviously there's a need out there for some municipal marijuana. However, I'm very concerned that we do not repeat the mistakes that other states have done. California, obviously, Colorado, and things like that. So we're taking a very big gamble here. We are taking a very big gamble. We're responding to a lot of people's needs. And I just hope, the Star-Tribune this morning had an article that said that we are on the table here passing a very, very restrictive law in terms of distribution of medical marijuana. And I hope that remains the case. Because if it doesn't, and if it grows, and if it expands like other states, we can expect to see the same problems of other states. And all of us sitting here are not going to want to open up the paper or hear on the radio someday about some child that we hoped we were going to help, and because of our oversights in keeping this a very tight and very restricted law, if some child dies. So I hope we're doing the right thing here. I know we're trying as hard as we can, but this is new territory, new ground, and I really have serious doubts. I would much rather sit back and watch the scenario play out around the country first and learn from their mistakes even more. But I do know this bill will probably pass the House tonight, and frankly, I just don't know how I'm going to vote. Thank you.
The member from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Madam Speaker and members, well, I've been listening for a while to a lot of members kind of agonizing about their votes or explaining their votes mainly about why they're going to be voting no. And it's interesting to me to hear what people are struggling with. And I just want to frame this a little bit for you, kind of the way I see it, because we've done a lot of things this session that involve taking a vote to do something where we don't have perfect information. And in fact, that's something we do quite a bit, especially in the health area. We act without perfect information. But not long ago, we had a very passionate debate about e-cigarettes. And many members didn't want to ban e-cigarettes, didn't want to add them to the Clean Indoor Air Act because it's unknown. We don't have enough research to show that they're harmful, according to some members. And now we have this medical cannabis where it's true. We don't have perfect information. We haven't had the studies done by the FDA. We don't have the dosages. It doesn't come from the pharmacy already set in a little bottle, all tested. And I think, as Representative Melin has pointed out, that's really not so uncommon, even with drugs that have come from the FDA. And because drugs are often used off-label, they're used in ways that haven't necessarily been tested for. Sometimes they're used on people on whom they haven't been tested. For example, on children. Drugs are used on children without complete testing on children, or on pregnant women where they haven't been completely tested on pregnant women. So there is risk. The point I really want to make is that what we're talking about here is allowing people to take a risk themselves. People who want to take the medicine themselves or give it to their children. Are you willing to let people make their own decision in concert with their physician? That's what we're talking about here. So when Representative Uglum says, what if a child gets hurt? Well, a child could get hurt, but that is a decision to be made by the parents, whether they want to take the risk. They're going to know, and their medical person is going to know that we don't have perfect information. And the family and the physician together are going to make that decision. And the question here isn't whether we are going to give a medicine to a child. It's whether we are going to allow that family to make a decision to even have that choice. Now, the reason I contrast that with the e-cigarettes is because that's a different situation. That's a situation where somebody who's using that e-cig is making a choice for both himself and for the other person to take a risk. So if a person with an e-cig walks in here, they're making the choice that we are all going to breathe it, whether it's safe or harmful. That's very different. In that situation, my view would be we should make a decision to say we're not going to make people take a risk they don't want to take. Here we're on the other side. We're saying let's let people make their own choices. Isn't that what freedom is? And granted, we always put guardrails around that. There are lots of guardrails in society. We're not letting people take this awful synthetic cannabinoid, which is proven to be so harmful that Representative Simonson passed a bill this session to stop that scourge. We're not letting people take that risk. But here's a risk that seems reasonable, and all we're doing, all Representative Melin is doing, is saying let the families decide. Let them and their practitioners decide. There's nothing in this bill that says any practitioner has to prescribe this medication or any patient has to take it. All we're saying is let the people make their own choice. And I think that's something that, if you think about it that way, it really is something that we should do for these families that need it so badly. I wish there were more conditions here that people could use it for, because we're still not allowing people who want to take that risk and need to take it in this restrictive conference report. And I have a constituent who's written to me who has a degenerative eye disease, that there are now studies going on in the UK that seem to suggest that medical cannabinoids could be helpful, and he's saying, can I use it? And I'm going to have to say no. The legislature's decided that you can't have that option. So that's my hesitation with this bill, is that it's too restrictive, that it still tells people that they can't make their own choices. And I think that's wrong. But it's the best we've got, and I urge members to support it.
The member from Blue Earth, Representative Cornish.
Real quickly, I have got concerns about this bill also, but I was just thinking here, we were talking about FDA-approved drugs and not being FDA and the things we have to worry about. And I was thinking of the TV commercials, and even when an FDA drug is approved, you can take it and get dizziness, diarrhea, schizophrenia, suicidal thoughts, high blood pressure, chills, vision problems, and both impotency and conditions that last longer than 4 hours. So I would say that we have probably got more chance of getting a reaction from an FDA-approved drug than we do marijuana right now. And with the tight way that we've controlled this, I think it's a pretty safe bet. I'm sure, naturally hoping, like all of you, there isn't a big "I told you so" in the future. But for now, there is no reason for me to stand in the way anymore. Once law enforcement is neutral and the Department of Health says that they can do it and keep a tight ship, why should I stand on a box with a sign that says no? So I feel that I've got enough facts and enough cover to back my decision today, and I plan to vote green. Thank you.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Hertas.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And when this whole debate started, it seemed to be a proposition that was a lot looser and a lot more permissive than what we see has come about during the course of the legislative process. And to that, Representative Melin, I commend you for the work that you've done on this so far. We've talked quite a bit about different circumstances relating to cannabis, whether there are qualified conditions that are limited and restricted in which you can get certification from a physician in order to do this. We've talked about dosing. Dosing is an issue in anything. And in terms of the dose that's prescribed and that which a recipient of that prescription actually exercises that discretion is, as Representative Liebling said, a matter of personal responsibility, personal choice. And there's nothing to really prevent somebody from overdosing or taking current medications contrary to the way things have been directed. We've also talked about the fact that this has been tightened up, that you don't get a 90-day supply and you have a 30-day supply. I do have concerns about the metabolic effect of cannabis versus other drugs and alcohol. Alcohol, for example, absorbed really with water and is flushed through your system in a rather relatively short period of time. In a matter of a few hours, it's gone. THC, or cannabis, as I've read it and understand it, it's soluble with your fat, the body fat, and it remains in your system and in your liver for up to 30 days. That is of concern to me. I have a question regarding the distribution. Would Representative Melin yield for a question?
She will yield. Representative Hertas.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Melin, the difference between the House bill and the Senate bill increases the distribution. And I understand it to be now, instead of one distributor, there's two distributors, and each of those distributors would be entitled up to 4 distribution points or additional distribution points. So if I'm doing that math right, it would be 2 times 4 is 8, plus their primary locations would be a total of 10. Is that correct?
Representative Melin.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and Representative Hertas. No, there's 2 manufacturing or cultivation sites, and they can have up to 4 distribution sites. One of their distribution sites could be where they manufacture or cultivate, or it could not. But the maximum amount of points of access for medical cannabis statewide will be 8.
Representative Hertas.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And a couple more questions for Representative Melin, if she would yield.
She will yield. Representative Hertas.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Melin, so if somebody becomes a licensed or authorized distributor, does that automatically entitle them to those 4 locations, or will they have to get some type of an additional license or go through a review or a certificate of need like we do with hospitals? Is there something in the bill that really gives some purview in terms of the department, whether or not these are additionally constructed and where?
Representative Melin.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and Representative Hertaz. The manufacturer has to operate the distribution sites, so it's the same entity as the manufacturer. So it's all licensed and registered and regulated through the Department of Health, but it's not the sort of scenario where there's 2 manufacturers and then 8 individual businesses are running the distribution sites. It's actually the manufacturer that each runs the 4 distribution sites. So it's just kind of a 2-business model. They're each entitled to 4 distribution sites.
Representative Hertaz.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I think, Representative Melin, maybe you misunderstood my question. I want to know if on the onset, once they start growing in production, they become the manufacturer-producer, do they automatically get permission to decide where and how many the other distribution points they're going to put up or locate around the state, or does the state actually have some purview or some oversight on that?
Representative Melin.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and Representative Hertaz. It's required to be based on patient access and geographic diversity, and the Commissioner of Health would have inputs on that through the rulemaking process to make sure that patients have access. So if, for example, the manufacturer just decided the metro area had the most amount of patients and decided to put up all 4 distribution sites in the metro area, they wouldn't be able to do that based on the statute and based on the oversight of the Department of Health.
Representative Hertaz.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And the last question I would have of Representative Melin is, I know it's a little late in the game. This has been through the process already, but was it ever discussed that any of this would be just distributed to a pharmacy in terms of access and choice, that that would be a controlled substance, not unlike anything else?
Representative Melin.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and Representative Hertaz. That would be an ideal situation. Unfortunately, federal law prohibits the distribution at a pharmacy. So pharmacists are able to work for the manufacturer either at the manufacturing site or the dispensing site, but they're unable to dispense from a pharmacy due to federal restrictions.
Representative Hertaz.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you for reminding me of that, Representative Melin. I did read that once, and I forgot about that aspect of it. The last thing I'd like to just say is it was kind of refreshing to listen to what Representative Liebling had discussed. She talked about freedom and personal responsibility, access and choice. Those are things that we all want to have in health care. And I just find it really difficult as we talk about these issues that, even with regard to the freedom and personal choice, my wife and I, we have 3 children. They're all adults. We've been there, done that, have a T-shirt. And really don't care to have to purchase maternity coverage anymore. The Affordable Care Act and things like that are just some of the onerous things that we see coming out with this rollout of the Affordable Care Act, but I don't want to divert onto that issue. So thank you for clarifying my questions, and I will yield. Thank you.
The member from Dakota, Representative Garofalo.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. First of all, let me say that I sincerely want to thank the legislative leadership of the House DFL and the Senate DFL, particularly the Speaker and the Majority Leader, for moving forward on this bill. I know it was a difficult path, and especially in an election year, the easy thing to do just would have been to ignore it and kick the can down the road. And I do want to say thank you for addressing this issue and allowing a vote and moving forward on it. Secondly, I want to thank my colleague, Representative Melin, for her excellent work on this bill. Sometimes I think we overstate the importance of authors, but in this case, you really can't do that. Representative Melin brought the trifecta of talents to bear on this issue. First, she has legislative intelligence. Second, she has Minnesota determination. And third, and probably most importantly, is she has Iron Range stubbornness. So it took an exceptional author to get this bill through the process, and she navigated it very well. And I just want to say thank you, Representative Melin, for all your efforts on it. Members, I do want to talk about the differences in the conference report, and I will be voting yes today. But I do want to highlight some concerns I have about the conference report that will be moving forward today. First of all is that this bill has unnecessary limitations on those who would benefit from getting pain relief and from relieving their suffering. The requirements that were put into this bill were not done by the author, they were not done by the advocates, they were done by outside interests that really had a fact-free nature to them. Second of all, the eight distribution sites is a severe limitation and is a barrier and obstacle to people accessing these items. And third and finally is the prohibition on allowing the full plant, to allow patients to have access to that. My concern today is that those three factors combined together are just simply not going to allow this business model to work. The costs will be too high. The medicine will be too expensive for a very small and limited population to access it, and it will force the model to collapse and it won't work. I hope that doesn't happen. It may happen, it may not. But it's enough of a concern for me to at least highlight that these excessive limitations may result in this and may result in actually hurting the people we are intending to affect today. But ultimately, despite these concerns, again, I'll be voting yes today. And I'll be voting yes today because it offers hope. It offers hope to a lot of families who are hurting, who are suffering. It gives them the hope to improve their quality of life. And I pledge to you and to those who support this bill that if we do find that this bill creates barriers and obstacles, that next year I will work with others on this as well, and that hopefully we can have the same bipartisan coalition to make sure that we can have this bill do its intending, and that is to help as many Minnesotans as possible. And Madam Speaker and members, I'll just close by saying that it is nice when Republicans and Democrats work together to help people by expanding their freedom and personal liberties as opposed to limiting them. And I hope that's something we see more of in the future. So I'll be voting yes today and would encourage my colleagues to do the same thing. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The member from Washington, Representative Schoen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. And to go over a couple points, I'm going to start off with, this is not California. If you are under the influence of any substance, because we've heard this discussion time and time again, if you are under the influence of any substance, any medication that impairs your driving, it is illegal. You will be arrested, processed, and dealt with according to law. Whether it's cannabis, OxyContin, sleep aids, alcohol, whatever, paint, whatever it may be. Marijuana cookies, they are not part of this bill as an acceptable form of medication delivery. We talk about side effects on what will happen to these kids. And we've heard so much talk about cannabis and its development on children's brains. But the fact remains, these parents are trying to deal with kids with having seizures. And 10 seizures a day, I can guarantee you, has a lot of negative effect on the development of a human brain. They take medications that we know will affect their kidneys and will damage them, just to get a few more years of life. And this offers a glimmer of hope. And we're really not breaking new ground. The federal government's been sending marijuana to patients since the 1970s as a result of a court case when they rescheduled cannabis to Schedule I. Not every single person is happy with this bill, and if you're not sure why, I suggest you check Representative Melin, Senator Dibble, Representative Hamilton, and my Twitter feed, and you can find out that there's a lot of unhappy people with this bill. We're on the right track here, and I remember sitting next to Representative Hamilton saying, I remember why I changed my mind, because someday we're all going to get old enough and we're going to have these needs. And he looked at me and he said, buddy, sometimes you don't get that old. And then I remembered sitting next to him, and he's holding his cane, and I never felt so bad in my life. Several times again. Any one of us could be in that spot. And the arguments we hear day after day are, don't legalize recreational marijuana. That's what you're saying, and that's not what this is. This is about helping Minnesotans that can't find the relief, can't find that FDA-approved medication, as Representative Cornish pointed out, had so many serious side effects. And let me assure you one more time, Minnesota, the bill that Representative Melin and Senator Dibble were finally able to get together that will be able to be signed into law is not like California. Please vote green.
Representative Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Schoen, for trying to make me cry again, you big bully. I'm just teasing. I'm just kidding. Just kidding. Medical cannabis, medical marijuana. What's the difference? Does it really matter? And I'll tell you absolutely yes. And yesterday I want to thank Capitol TV. They had medical marijuana displayed on the screen, and when I brought that up in the conference committee, they had it changed within 5 minutes, and I thank you for that. Why does it matter? You know, I'm going to turn to my good friend, Representative Dean, who I respect a tremendous amount. And this is what I love about this place. Representative Dean, you do an awesome job. You're compassionate, and you lay out concerns, and this is what it's all about as far as how we go back and forth on issues so that we can have these checks and balances. Representative Green, thank you for sharing your story as well. And again, why does it matter? And the concerns that we have about this going to the nth degree and becoming recreational, or recognizing those individuals that lost their lives in the event it's abused. I did a quick query. You know, we have Percocet, fentanyl, codeine, oxycodone, Vicodin. These are all medications or drugs derived from the opium poppy. So is heroin. There's not a single person in this body that I've heard that is advocating for recreational heroin. And I want to thank everybody once again. I'm helping a kid. He's 22 years old. And I'm so proud of him. He has struggled with heroin addiction. And he's in treatment. He graduated treatment. He's doing wonderful. That's not what this is about. This is about having tight restrictions on this, providing another venue so patients, parents, whomever the case, can have another set of options to address the needs. And I would like to thank everybody involved for the thoughtfulness, in the debate. You know, I'm tired. I'm sorry. It's been emotional 2 days, but I'm tired. And Representative Melin, once again, thank you so much for your leadership. I greatly appreciate it. And I don't think we're done discussing this as well. We've heard all the concerns here, and I hope we're not done discussing this. I hope a year from now we're a lot smarter on this issue with the information that we're gathering and everything, so that if we need to make adjustments, you know, we will make adjustments. So this shouldn't be the end of this debate. Once again, thank you for allowing me to be part of it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Melin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members, and thank you for the debate here this Friday evening, as I know many of us are wanting to wrap up session and get home to our families after a long and demanding session as usual. And I just want to remind members that when we passed this bill about a week ago, our gallery was full of families, families that had tears in their eyes and were here to watch us and to see how we were going to discuss this issue. And afterwards, we heard from a lot of those families thanking us for passing the bill off the floor. And really, it doesn't matter how much they thank us. We all have the choice here to vote red or green, and I hope that many of you find it in your hearts to vote green. But the reason this bill is becoming law is not because of us. It's because of them. It's because citizen lobbyists, families, parents, grandparents came down all session long and really changed the hearts and minds of many legislators on this issue. They told their stories and they fought for their kids or for their loved ones or for their neighbors in order to provide them some relief. Members, patients have safe legal access to medical cannabis in 21 other states. They should be afforded that same opportunity here in Minnesota, where they're under the care of some of the best healthcare practitioners in the country. We shouldn't have to ask families here in Minnesota to leave in order to get the medicine that they need to help their family. So I really want to thank everyone that's been involved and been part of the debate on both sides of the issue. I think that that debate strengthened this bill, and because of that, we're addressing a lot of concerns, and we are passing a strong piece of legislation here this evening. So again, I would just ask for your green vote. Thank you.
The clerk will take the roll on the bill. The clerk will close the roll. There being 89 ayes and 40 nays, the bill is passed as amended by conference and is title agreed to. The next bill on the calendar, Conference Committee report on House files.
Conference Committee report on House file is Carlson motion, Mr. Speaker. Conference Committee report on House File 3172, an act relating to state government. The report's addressed to the Honorable Paul Thiessen, Speaker of the House, the Honorable Sandra Pappas, President of the Senate. We, the undersigned conferees for House File 3172, report that we've agreed upon the items in dispute and recommend as follows. The report signed by all 5 conferees on the part of the House and all 5 conferees on the part of the Senate. Carlson moves that the report of the Conference Committee on House File 3172 be adopted and that the bill be repassed as amended by conference.
Representative Carlson.
Mr. Speaker, members, I'd like to begin by thanking members of the Conference Committee, the nonpartisan staff, the partisan staff in both bodies, and also particularly thank the members of the Conference Committee, Representative Mahoney, Representative Wagenius, Representative Marquardt, and Representative Huntley. But I would like to point out that we had other members that were involved in the process as well. I mean, all of you know that this is a bill with several articles, and frequent attendees at our conference committees were people like Representative Murphy, Representative Paymar, Representative Hornstein, Representative Clark, Representative Khan, and others. So I would like to thank all of the people involved in this process. I'd like to start by giving you a little bit of information about the overall Conference Committee framework. It included $313 million for investments. After subtracting the $20 million for the propane heating assistance that we passed earlier in the session, and $20.5 million for other bills, pensions, medical marijuana that we just passed, for example, That left the conference committee with $275 million in general fund dollars to be used to help Minnesota move forward. In the end, the conference committee report comes in at $262 million in general fund spending in fiscal 14 and 15, and $850 million in fiscal 16 and 17, or what we commonly call the tails. That left $10 million on the bottom line. Just like to touch on the highlights of some of the, or all of the articles, I guess. First of all, in the area of higher education, we had excess funds in the student grant program, and under current law, by leaving that money there, the average for the living and miscellaneous allowance for college students across the state in all of our institutions who qualify for aid, they'll get $118 increase on average, and will also pick up about 5,000 additional students. We provided $4.5 million to the U of M and Mayo for research in regenerative medicine. We provided $17 million in base funding for the MNSCU system, so that they could address costs that need to be addressed in that system, not the least of which are some salary adjustments that were badly needed. And we provided funding for College Possible. In the Economic Development and Jobs Committee, we provided $20 million for the statewide broadband to be started, and that will help economic development in greater Minnesota. We provided funding in Greater Minnesota's, or the Greater Minnesota Job Package. We had funding of the 7 Greater Minnesota Initiative Foundations, funding for the innovation vouchers, funding the small business development centers, funding for business development, public investments. And in addition to that, we began the payback to the 21st Century Fund, which had been used earlier to help help balance the budget when the state was having some difficult financial situations, and that will be paid back over a period of roughly 5 years from the assigned risk plan. The public safety article, a few of the highlights there. We have $3 million in the disaster assistance contingency account, and that'll avoid hopefully having special sessions. Probably the most important thing there is some of the policy that's been attached to that, and that was a special project worked on over the past year or more by Representative Pawlowski, so we got that started. We had funding for firefighter training. We have funding for the youth intervention program, including funding that roughly $100,000 designated for the East African youth. And then we have $300,000 for the sexual abuse prevention program. We provided funding to implement the expungent bill that was passed, and $11 million for emergency communication, or for the emergency communication network. In the area of state government, a few of the things that we did there. There were a number of veterans provisions. We provided funding to the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency to conduct a housing needs assessment for veterans. That came out of a special subcommittee project headed by Representative Newton. We provided $125,000 for the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund for the Veterans Voices program. The bill would provide expedited licenses for former and current members of the military to make the transition into civilian life easier by recognizing and expanding upon their licensures so they will be able to get jobs in Minnesota and hopefully be attracted to Minnesota as well. Enhancements were made to the statutes dealing with veteran-owned small businesses. The Department of Corrections, there again we had to provide for salary supplements. That was $16.2 million, $11 million for bed rentals at county jails, paid for an enhanced penalty for repeat criminal sexual conduct, and appropriated $300,000 for sexual violent prevention grants. In the Department of Public Safety, we provided $500,000 for battered women's shelters for East African women and children, $500,000 for expanding youth intervention programs, $3 million for the disaster assistant contingency account that I mentioned earlier. In the area of transportation, this was one article that we spent quite a lot of time on and worked closely with Representative Horenstein, who was not one of the conferees, but I think probably attended just about every meeting we had because transportation was a continuing issue. There is a one-time $13 million transfer of leased vehicle sales tax revenue to Washington, Anoka, Dakota, Carver, and Scott counties, what we call the ring counties, and they had been capped at $9 million, and so we provided for a transfer. There were excess funds in the rural account, but we provided $6.5 million, and this is important for people to listen to, in general fund dollars to backfill Greater Minnesota, and another $6.5 million in trunk highway funds. So it ends up Greater Minnesota remains at the number they were at $62 million, and that did help with that transfer of the $13 million to the ring counties by lifting the cap. So that one we clearly created a win-win situation. With that, we provided $10 million for pothole repair, and we provided $31.5 million for the corridors of commerce, and of course that included that $6.5 million from the trunk highway fund for Greater Minnesota, and $6 million for additional state troopers. In the area of agriculture and the environment, a few highlights. We funded the Farm to Food Shelf program and new SCORE dollars for our counties. There is new money for the, and I hope I pronounced this right, my farming background is very limited, the porcine virus research. That was one that came in late to the process. I think Representative Poppy is smiling. I maybe mispronounced that. Yes. But at any rate, that is a major concern because the virus could greatly reduce the number of animals that would be surviving in the area of our pork producing communities. We took the next steps to help our communities in groundwater management areas that are under stress because of declining groundwater. The best local example of that would be White Bear Lake. We provided for the dog and cat breeder bill. We now have the first in the nation response and compensation fund for beekeepers who are losing their hives at an alarming rate. And finally, I would like to highlight the creation of an innovative terrestrial invasive research center at the University of Minnesota. Our farms and our forests and our parks and our prairies are being invaded by a new generation of weeds and pests and pathogens, and that was due to the hard work of one of our conferees and others. In the area of education, E12, I covered higher ed earlier. We provide $25 per pupil increase in the basic formula allowance. to districts, allowing them greater flexibility and local control in addressing what their needs are. And as one of our conferees, Representative Marquardt, likes to point out, that will move us toward the world's greatest workforce, right, Representative Marquardt? The world's greatest workforce. I like your line. We also provided targeted investments to boost student achievement outcomes, including a $4.9 million increase in English learning funding for the Reading Corps and recovery schools, the school lunch and school breakfast aid, and $10 million funding support for teacher evaluation. And we provided $11.5 million to expand high-quality early learning education opportunities through increases in early childhood family education, or ECFE, early learning scholarships, and school readiness funding. Finally, the last part of the bill deals with the Health and Human Service segment. Would point out that that's the biggest part of the bill, probably 45% in terms of the language items, but it was also one of our major investments. We provided 5% to the home and community-based services. The 5%ers, we talked about that very early in the legislative session, and that was fully funded. We provided help for Minnesota seniors. We have a rate increase for nursing homes, particularly in rural areas, an increase for senior nutrition services. We provide Safe Harbor and Homeless Youth Act funding. A portion of the state Safe Harbor appropriation will increase the number of specialized beds available for sex trafficking victims. And keep in mind, those are young people that are involved with that, and that was an important initiative. And $1 million in additional base funding will provide additional shelter and support services for homeless youth across the state. We also have grants to reduce the racial health disparities, and those will be grants that will help the East African communities, the women's reproductive health, mental health, and dementia outreach. We require the Department of Human Services to create a statewide training program for autism providers on a culturally appropriate basis, and I think many of us have read about certain communities are being particularly hard hit with autism. We provide Respute grants for children and adults. We give a 10% MA TEFRA fee reduction for all parents with disabled children, and we create an interagency autism website for people with autism in their families. So, Mr. Speaker and members, that was a quick overview of a very important bill that will help move Minnesota forward. If you have specific questions, the other conferees and the other members who helped work with the various parts of the bill will be available for answering questions. I would appreciate your support.
Discussion. Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Carlson, I have a question here about a certain section of the bill. I'm looking at page 68, and it is section 24 of the bill. Can you just describe to me what happened there, please?
There are a few pages in the bill. We're checking on what you're referencing. Maybe you could describe what you're referencing, and that might help me recall, as I think there are about 600-700 pages in the bill. So when you say a page number and lines, that's a little bit difficult to track, but we're looking it up.
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Representative Carlson, it looks like it's amending the WISA bill that was signed into law by Governor Dayton on Sunday.
They needed to clarify that it applied to goods and services instead of
Okay.
Representative Carlson.
Representative Anderson, this was what I'll put in the category of a correction or clarification. If I recall correctly, that came from either the governor's office or the state agency, and we needed to clarify the language that clarified that this was for goods or services, or an agreement for goods and services in excess of $500,000. So that was included as a clarification section.
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Carlson, when it's clarifying the language for goods and services, is it then precluding certain items that were originally in the WISA bill?
Representative Carlson.
Mr. Speaker, I think I best yield to the original author of the Women's Economic Justice Act.
Representative Anderson.
If I could ask you to recognize the chief author of the bill.
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If Representative Melin would yield.
She will yield. Representative Melin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Anderson. The reason that we added the clarifying language that it was for a goods or services contract was due to some concerns that were raised in this body, but also that state agencies had to make sure that if somebody just got a grant, say from deed, in an amount excess from $500,000, that would not be included.
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Melin, so what we're doing here with this bill is we're saying that if you receive a grant from deed as a business, you're not required to comply with the equal pay for equal work law. Is that correct, Representative Melin? If you will yield, please.
Representative Melin.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Anderson, the portions of the Women's Economic Security Act that had to do with equal pay, the intent all along was to include businesses that contracted with the state in excess of $500,000. I always interpreted that as a contract for goods or services. That was always my intent and the intent of the legislation. This just adds clarity to be sure that we're being clear that this doesn't apply to state grants, but it applies to contracts.
Representative Anderson.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Melin. However, when you went through the conference committee report, this was the Senate language, and the conference committee chose to take the Senate language so that it would apply to grants that the Department of Economic Development gives out to businesses. And so it was the Senate language that said we want to make sure not only is it the businesses that are doing contract work for the state, but it's also the businesses that are receiving taxpayer funding from the state, that they would need to comply with equal pay for equal work. With this amendment in the bill, now we're saying that those that are actually receiving taxpayer funding from the state don't have to comply with the equal pay for equal work for women. And I guess I find that troubling since we spent so much time on this when Governor Dayton had a great celebration on Sunday saying this is finally going to help women in the state of Minnesota, but we're only saying that it's only going to apply to certain women. It's not going to apply to women that are working for a business that is getting money from the state. So taxpayer-funded grants that are going out to businesses don't have to comply with equal pay for equal work. I decided after I looked this up in the bill, I took a look at the conference committee tape. This happened on Tuesday, 2 days after Governor Dayton signed the Women's Economic Security Act into law. Governor Dayton comes to the conference committee and says, we need to change this because, heaven forbid, we know that this is going to be too onerous for the grant recipients. So Governor Dayton, and as was given as testimony by Senator Pappas, it was not only Governor Dayton, but it was also his representative from his office. It was the Commissioner Lindsay. It was the Department Administration. And it was also a staff member from the House. So now we're saying those folks, those businesses, don't have to comply for equal pay for equal work. And that's wrong. And I can't believe that just 2 days after we had a huge celebration of signing that bill into law, we're going to say, oh, but it doesn't apply to these folks. They're exempt. And so we're going to do carve-outs for certain entities. Well, if there's truly a concern about what kind of impact this would have on businesses, this is the exact reason why we said you needed to take a closer look about what this means for the state of Minnesota. And I have a feeling that when we come back next year, we're going to have more of the agencies, not just the Department of Admin, not just from the governor's office, but more agencies that are going to be coming back and saying, oh boy, this had some unintended consequences because the law isn't clear. And I was hoping that you would have made some efforts to make those fixes. But I think it's ironic that here, just 2 days after that law was signed into law by Governor Dayton, now we're going to do this carve-out. So thank you, members. That's the only comment I have so far.
Representative Gruenhagen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members. I know we want to sine-die this pretty soon, and so this will be my last bipartisan floor speech, okay, for this session. Representative Carlson, I don't want to get into the weeds. I understand there's a lot of good programs in there. In the interest of time, I'll just make some observations. One, this bill spends, if I understand correctly, in 14-15, $262 million, or about that. My concern is that when I look out at 16-17, it has tails of $850 million, okay, into the next biennium. So that's, we're getting close to $1 billion tails just on this bill alone in the next biennium. Now, a huge part of that is HHS. If I recall, a couple weeks ago or so, the governor sent a letter even to the House leadership and the Senate leadership and said, you got to reduce your spending. You're spending too much, okay? And I would agree with the governor. So, one of the things about this session that I've looked at just here recently is the overall spending we've done. And members, we are simply spending ourselves into oblivion at a rate that is unsustainable, and the private sector will not be able to generate enough taxes in order to cover. We are approaching this biennium, based on the February forecast, of almost a $40 billion biennium budget without this spending bill. Members, with this spending bill and the other ones we passed, according to my staff, we grew spending at a rate of 11 to 12% this last biennium. Total spending, besides the general fund, jumped $8.5 billion, again, February forecast, without this bill. So we're over $70 billion in total spending in the upcoming biennium. In this biennium. We've got tails of spending growth in the next biennium of another $4 billion. With this spending of $850 million, you're going to look at over $5 billion of tails of overall spending besides the general fund in this biennium. Members, and I'm talking to both sides of the aisle, if you ran your finances, personal finances like this, or your business like this, you'd be broke. Okay? And we've got areas that we need to look at to reform. And what I mean by that is, members, we can't just keep piling more and more money onto the same system. One of the reasons I like being on the Higher Ed committee is because the chairman there wants reform and accountability. And I can work with him all day, regardless of what party he's with. Okay? He doesn't believe in just piling more money onto the system. And yet, when I look at our healthcare system with MNsure, a study, I offered amendments to bring efficiency and better reimbursement to the doctors and hospitals, but we rejected them. Well, the Kaiser Foundation just came out with a study that the average cost per enrollee across the nation for Obamacare, including MNsure, was $2,500 per enrollee of government tax dollars. In Minnesota, we did better than that. We spent $3,700 per enrollee in the state of Minnesota for MNsure. That is simply irresponsible and unsustainable. I talked to a private insurance company rep here at the state I said, if you had to pay $3,700 in expenses to sign up one person in your company, what would happen? He said, we'd be broke unless we had somebody else paying the bill. And members, that's what we're doing here. We're having somebody else, the small businesses, the citizens, the taxpayers, picking up the bill. Their income is not going up 11 to 12% per year. Okay? I know you've got good intentions, but you're doing more damage than good when you increase government spending at this rate. The other thing I want to leave you with, because I know we want to get out of here, okay, is, and this is a bipartisan comment, what we have done to the value of our dollar since 1944. And again, I'm referencing the International Bretton Woods monetary graph. That graph was referenced by President Nixon when he announced a removal of our dollar from the gold standard. Okay, so this is a bipartisan comment. A 1944 dollar in 2009, do you know how much it's worth in purchasing power? 8 cents, members. A 1944 dollar is worth 8 cents today, according to this international monetary graph. And the government wants to take 4 to 5 cents of the 8 cents in taxes. And you wonder why we have people at food shelves. You wonder why we have people who are homeless. Members, our excessive spending is what's causing it. Now that's 2009. Oh, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll wrap up here real quick. Okay. Oh, you want me to keep going? No. Don't encourage me, let me tell you. If you go on the internet, you'll find that the Federal Reserve wants to devalue the dollar another 30%. This is economic insanity, members. Now, what's happened to personal income with all this printing up and creating money out of nothing? Well, according to Fox News, between 2009... All right. Hey. Between 2009 and 2012, the average person's income went up 0.5% in this nation. 0.5%. But the top 1% wealthy in this country, they went up 30%, ladies and gentlemen. 0.5% versus 30%. So printing up money out of nothing, fiat money, is not going to solve the problem. It's going to make it worse. We need to vote red on this bill and show some accountability. Finally, I know some of you may doubt what I'm saying, but I'll leave you with the words of Thomas Jefferson, okay? Just a minute. Our founding father, Thomas Jefferson, said this: if the American people ever allow private banks like the Federal Reserve to control the issue of their currency, first by inflation, then by deflation, the banks and corporations that will grow up around them will deprive the people of their property until their children wake up homeless on the continent the fathers conquered. I believe that the banking institutions are more dangerous to our liberties than a standing army. The issuing power of currency should be taken from the banks and restored to the people to whom it properly belongs. Thomas Jefferson. Think of the housing crisis, how we inflated prices and then they deflated prices, and all the problems it's caused. Members, we have to get this spending under control, or you're going to bankrupt your children and grandchildren, and my children and grandchildren. And I don't believe you want to do that. Okay? So members, finally, vote red on this. Let's show accountability that we can live within our means, and let's preserve some prosperity for our children and grandchildren. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members.
Representative Erdahl.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. And I'm sorry that I've spent much of the afternoon involved in having the front tooth that broke last night put back together again. I'm coming to that. But anyway, so I've kind of feel that I've been behind on the debates here, and frankly, I could listen to Representative Gruenhagen another 5-10 minutes just to catch up. But I'm concerned about a provision in this bill that allows free bus transportation on Election Day. Apparently, you don't have to even vote on Election Day to get free bus rides. Now, I've got a question. Would Representative Dean yield?
He will yield. Representative Erdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Dean, let's say that I was in Grove City on an election day, and I didn't vote. I was just wandering the street, and the bus came by and picked me up and took me to Litchfield. I mean, could I then get off at the local fast food place and eat a cheeseburger?
Representative Dean.
Mr. Speaker and Representative Erdahl, I don't know if they have a regular transit bus service in Grove, but if they did, you could.
Representative Erdahl.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and that doesn't seem right to me that free public bus rides could be available for cheeseburgers. I mean, just in a real brief digression, then I'm done. I'm really done. Last night I went to a local eatery, and I could have had a slim meal, but I succumbed to a bacon cheeseburger. I bit into it, it struck back and broke my tooth. There seems to be some irony in that. Thank you.
Representative Woodard.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I will be very brief as well, but there is one point, there's one part of this bill that is a little upsetting. And that is something that was put in the dark of the night that really should not have been put in there. And I will tell you, it's the PSEO gag rule. This body has already passed the elimination of the PSEO gag rule, and then in the last minutes, before this bill was closed out in conference committee, they put it back in. And the reason why, and the majority leader in the Senate was quoted in the Hibbing News, in the newspaper. I'm not sure what the name of the Hibbing newspaper is. This is his quote. I can tell you there are places around the state that high schools and curriculum are going to be hurt by this provision. And this is the important part. He said, the more we can promote that families can save money by sending them to higher education, the more families are hurt by that decision. That is the reason why the PSEO gag rule is back. Is because the majority leader in the Senate felt that the more our families knew that if their kids went to PSEO, they could save money and college would be cheaper. Members, I ask, I beg that in the next session that this body eliminates the PSEO gag rule and allows families to really understand the power of going to college while they're in high school. Because it not only helps them ensure they get that college education, but it ensures they realize that this is an investment that the state has made in them, and an investment that allows them to go to college much less expensive than they can if they don't use PSEO. Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members.
Representative Hertas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And a big, massive bill like this, 577 pages, you get it in a few minutes, and it's quite a bit to digest. And I did just that while we were waiting for some of this stuff to come through. And there's a couple things that jumped out at me, and I just want to bring one thing to your attention and probably ask the author to yield for one other. I noticed really towards the end of the bill, page 540, line 27, there was a $3 million payout for some litigation of a court case that's listed in the bill. And then also very near that, another one, 546.16, another $975,000. So nearly $4 million of this money is going out to pay some type of court claim litigation. And I guess my question to the members would be, what are we doing in terms of loss mitigation in terms of how we run our state? Do we have a system in place to make sure that the things we do don't invite litigation? That would be my question. Mr. Speaker, if the author would yield for a question.
He will yield.
Thank you.
Okay.
Representative Benson, in Article 27, under continuing care, there's a description about behavior specialist care, and it goes into a very lengthy and detailed reimbursement rates. And I'm just curious, when I'm looking at this, it starts out pretty much suggesting that folks at 275% of the poverty level don't contribute anything for reimbursement. But then it goes all the way up to 975% of the poverty level, and you still are getting reimbursement. So, members, the poverty level is $22,500 as I last understood it. So if you multiply that times 975%, we are subsidizing household income to $219,375. I don't understand that. So maybe the author could explain to me what this is about.
Representative Carlson.
Mr. Speaker, the court case you're referring to, and we may want to ask, or you may want to direct the question to the chair of the Health and Human Services Committee, but we spent a fair amount of time on this issue because we're under a federal court order, and the federal courts wanted to make sure that we made movement toward settling this particular question. We put language in terms of the biennium to show that we had good faith in terms of moving toward the settlement. But if you want more detail, you might want to request Representative Huntley to yield.
Representative Hertas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No, actually, I was just making a statement about having these types of losses and whatever we're doing as a state in our management of our affairs, that we're inviting this type of litigation. I don't pretend to know what the case is about. The question is just rhetorical, whether or not we have some type of loss mitigation program to make sure we don't do that in the future. But specifically, what I do want to know about is why we're subsidizing household income for behavior specialist therapists to 975% of household income, or poverty level income.
Representative Huntley.
Mr. Speaker and Representative, could you give us the page number on that last question so I know what program we're talking about?
Yeah, it starts 458.10 and runs through 459.5.
I think it's TEFRA, I imagine. So kids with disabilities, their families get some help to take care of the very high medical costs that they get.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'll just point out that it graduates from about 2% at the lowest level up to contributing about 11.25% of the adjusted cost. So that means that 90% of the expenses under this chapter here are being paid for household income above $220,000. And I'll yield. Thank you.
There being no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. Excuse me. All in favor of the motion to concur say aye. All opposed, no. Motion prevails. Now seeing no further... Representative Seltzer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would just like to take a moment and thank Representative Pawlowski and Representative Carlson for their help in getting into this bill an important study, a broad provision that will improve safety for our Minnesota post-secondary students. Study abroad programs generally are available through many colleges in our state, and usually they are wonderful experiences for our students, and they create international understanding, cultural awareness, and provide lifelong memories for most of our students who participate in them. However, that's not always the case. You may recall several years ago having heard about, in the media about a young Minnesota college student who was on a study abroad program in India. It was raining outside as he and a group of students who were out on a program-sanctioned hike on a slippery, sheer cliff without any supervision carrying very heavy backpacks. And this young man slipped on this sheer cliff and fell below to his death in a very angry, swollen river. This young man died before his time. And out of this and a number of other similar tragedies in Minnesota, parents found each other and formed a group called Clear Cause. And these folks did some research and found that there were no federal or state laws even requiring the reporting of the safety records of these study abroad programs. So Minnesota now has the opportunity to become a leader in this area and potentially save lives with a simple provision in the bill before you. Colleges will be required to provide the safety information from the study abroad programs they use to the Secretary of State's office, which will publish this information on their website, and this information will also be available on the Office of Higher Learning's website. So families and students will now have the opportunity to make informed decisions about programs for their students that not only will be educational, but safe. So I just want to again thank Representative Pawlowski and Representative Carlson for working with me to get this important groundbreaking provision into this bill.
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, when we discussed the WISA bill, we discussed the importance of having equal pay for equal work. And it wasn't a discussion about having one entity out of it, but making sure that it was an equal playing field for everyone. This bill does not do that. It carves out, makes an exemption for certain businesses while it makes the requirement for others. That's not the reaching the goal that was highlighted on that bill. But there's one other provision that I want to highlight to you. Last year in the budget bill, we added 1,266 government employees to our rolls. This year, in this bill alone, we're adding an additional 100 government workers. So we're up to well over 1,300 folks that we're adding to the state government payroll. We are growing government exponentially to the point that we will not be able to sustain this kind of growth in government. And if you're not worried about today, think about the future generations that will have to look at this and figure out how can we make this work, because it's clearly not sustainable. As I mentioned last year, we are growing government by the size of a small town in Representative Erdahl's district or Representative Krisha's district. We can't afford that. We can't sustain it and expect the people of Minnesota to pay more and more and more in taxes. We came back this legislative session having to undo many of the provisions that were passed into law next year. I expect that next year, in 2015, we'll have a similar call for an unsession because there's so much more that we're going to have to undo because of what is in this bill and all the other bills that we've seen come forward this year. Please vote no.
Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, members, we have before us a 577-page omnibus spending bill. 31 articles long. 31 articles long. I don't know if I've ever seen a bill with 31 articles in it. Members, the Constitution of our state, in Article 4, Section 17, says that laws are to embrace only one subject. No law shall embrace more than one subject, which shall be expressed in its title. Mr. Speaker, I'm wondering if the author would yield for a question.
He will yield. Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Carlson, can you tell us what is the subject of this bill?
Representative Carlson.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Drazkowski, the subject of this bill is the funding of state government, and it is an appropriations bill, and that would be the single subject in my view.
Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Carlson. Well, members, if you turn to page 32 in the bill, Article 2, Section 16, there's a section on an affordable housing plan developing a disparities report. I don't think that has anything to do with financing of state government. It appears to be policy. Members, if you turn to page 52 on the 577-page bill, Article 3, Section 20 develops a Commissioner's Accountability Plan. Strict policy to develop an accountability plan. The next section, Section 21, references competency standards in advanced manufacturing, healthcare services, information technology, and agriculture. And I see nothing related to finance or funding of our state government in that section. The next page, page 53, Section 22 of Article 4, Article 3, talks about an agricultural employment report. Nothing related to finance, spending, or anything related to that in that really standalone section of the bill. Members, if you turn to page 58 of the bill, Article 4, Section 3 references a brand new section developing a legislative water commission and has all new language going on to the next page outlining the composition of the commission and how it works. Members, if you go to page 62 of the bill, you will see language on the top at 62.4 talking about adoption of rules. Section 9 of that page talks about temporary military license. A brand new section developing a temporary military permit and fee. Another section 11 that talks about, again, about the temporary military permit. Not about funding or financing our state government. Members, on page 64, Article 4, Section 16 is about non-resident barbers and instructors of barbering, developing temporary military license and apprentice permits for people in that profession. Very likely good legislation. I don't know. I haven't read it in depth or studied it. But, Mr. Speaker, this is not finance language. This is not about financing our state government. Page 64, members, the next page creates another brand new section, all new language, around expedited and temporary licensing for former and current members of the military. Might be a good thing. I don't know. I don't know if it was heard in either house. But it's not about financing our state government. Members, page 68 of the bill, Section 25 on that page, has the initial appointments and the first meeting specified for the newly created Legislative Water Commission that was outlined earlier. Members, if you go to page 81 of the bill, and members, I only got up to page 375 out of 577 pages, and I could keep going for probably the next 20 minutes. I've got them all flagged, members. These are all policy pieces in this bill, some of which I'm guessing were crammed in here in the dark of night when no one was watching, and realizing we just received, again, similar to last year, this 577-page bill on our desk from conference committee about 2 hours ago now, maybe 2.5, Mr. Speaker, somewhere in there. But members, these are all similarly policy items not related to the financing of our state government. And members, this does not follow the spirit or the letter of what our Constitution says. We're violating our state constitution. And I would submit that if there's somebody in Minnesota that doesn't like something that's in the 577-page omnibus spending bill, that it might be a piece of policy or maybe one of the spending items or more than one, they may take it to court and put the entire bill at risk. Members, this is not the type of legislating that our constituents expect of us, and it's not the type of legislating that our forefathers included in our Constitution. It's not what they expected and framed out for us as we went forward into the future. So members, I don't know what else to say about this particular part at this point, except that it's very disappointing that we have gone this route. I'm also disappointed, as Representative Gruenhagen and others have articulated, this legislature is spending up until the very, very end of the session. One of the last major bill to come through here is spending another $250 million of taxpayer money that is accumulated because we overtaxed the citizens of the state of Minnesota in this biennium. This money is accumulated and piled up here, and the decision, rather than sending their money back to them, is to spend, and build more and more government to do more and more things to those who were, at least at one time, a free people in the state of Minnesota. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, members.
Representative Carlson.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to go through each and every one of the questions that were raised, but members, language is often needed to implement a policy, and I'll just reference a couple of them. References were made to the military license. We provided an appropriation to each and every one of those boards for rulemaking to expedite the licensing process when people are discharged from the military. You have to have language to support what you're giving direction to do. On the Commissioner's Accountability Plan, if the whole paragraph would have been read, it would have pointed out that that report was to be developed and to include policy and funding issues on the department's plan and any request for funding and so on. So you've got to read the entire paragraph. You've got to look what that language is supporting and what its purpose is. They go hand in hand, members. Thank you.
Representative Wiskowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for those words, Representative Carlson. But I also beg you members to look at some of the sections that I outlined, and I'm willing to share my bundle of papers here with anybody who would like to take a closer look. But the reality is there are many sections in this bill that are not tied to appropriations or don't have anything to do with carrying out the function of funding our state government. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Further discussion? What? Oh, the clerk will give the bill its third reading as amended by conference.
Third reading, House File 3172 is amended by conference.
Third reading. The clerk will take the roll on the bill. The clerk will close the roll. Dean votes aye. There being 75 ayes and 55 nays, the bill is passed as amended by conference and its title agreed to.
We're going to do the calendar.
Representative Mariani, what purpose do you rise?
Mr. Speaker, point of personal privilege.
State your point of personal privilege.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I rise in a point of personal privilege, and this is kind of an unusual thing, and I will not abuse you of our time together. We're all awfully tired, and we have some, in my opinion, very important speeches to hear from our colleagues who will be leaving soon, and it's important that we honor our time with them. But I do want to share something very quickly. Many of you have been walking out of the chamber for the past couple of weeks and have been encountering a group of people, some who are have been involved in a fast outside. Some of you have stopped and met with them and spoken with them, and I've actually seen some budding good new relationships develop as a result of that. Representative Bernardi, for instance, met a constituent who then together you walked over and had a conversation with the governor about their concern. And members, they're here asking us to do something that we're not going to do this session. And I don't want to get into the issue because we'd be here for weeks if we all got up on bills that we carried that we didn't do. I get that. But I just want to share very quickly a few things because I want to honor their witness in the way that they witnessed here with us. I think it really speaks wonderfully about the human condition, and it really speaks powerfully about Minnesotans. And these people, many folks don't think of them as Minnesotans. I do. And I think they reflect in both their desires and their hopes and the way that they go about trying to do that in a way that really, when it comes right down to it, basically says, we believe in you, the Minnesota House of Representatives. We believe in you, the elected officials of our state and our legislature. And so I want to just honor them very quickly in terms of acknowledging that presence that they had with us. I spent some time with them along with Representative Hamilton and Representative Clark and Representative Betsaw prior. And I have to tell you, members, I've been here for, I'm embarrassed to say this in many ways, I've been here for 2 decades. And there was a point in that conversation where I got pretty emotional. I had tears in my eyes. It's not unusual at the end of session, I get it. But for some of you who have been here for many years, I think you get this. When we do the work that we do, in order for us to survive as doing it, I believe we develop some pretty thick skins and some pretty thick walls around ourselves in order to be able to make it from one day to the other, especially staying up to 3 in the morning. And the humility I had in interacting with these Minnesotans was that they cut through those thick walls, and I refound my humanity in interacting with them at that moment. And so, members, and that was a gift, quite frankly. Members, I want to acknowledge our 2 leaders in the chamber, Representative Dowd and our Speaker, Thiessen, who has responded to these individuals formally, and I'm very encouraged by that bipartisan movement, and I want to encourage you to do the same. I want to encourage you to establish a relationship with these folks, and hopefully let it be a lesson that we establish relationships with folks that we don't know, but who come knocking on our door because they do believe in us, and they believe in our processes, and they believe in this fine institution and the important work that we do. So, Mr. Speaker, members, I'll stop there. I thank you for indulging me for a few minutes on this issue. It's been a powerfully emotional issue for me, as well as for many others. It's a constant reminder of the humility that we need to bring to the work that we do, and how incredibly powerfully gifted, in a gifted way, we are to be privileged to do the work that we do. So please, if they're still there when we're done, please stop by and introduce yourselves, and be open to them when they come knocking on your door. Thank you for being here, and thank you for helping me to re-believe in myself and re-believe in this institution. Thank you, members.
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. On your desks you will find a House resolution, and before we start with House member retirements, I want to recognize the longest serving employee of the Minnesota House of Representatives, Mark Rogoszewski. And Mark started on January 5th, 1971. I won't say it again, but Mark, we often talk about the staff, and Mark is one of those quiet, honest, dedicated workers that get stuff done. And it really came home to me a couple nights ago. I was here about 1 o'clock, and I was just about packing up, and all of a sudden Mark came out carrying a whole stack of copies. He was here, and he was going to be here, and he's going to be here late tonight. He's always been here since 1971. And I think it would be great if we could recognize Mark for the work he's done and the work he'll continue to do before he retires on behalf of the people of Minnesota. Thank you, Mark, and thank you for all the work that you've done.
Calendar for the day. The next bill on the calendar for the day is House File 3302. The clerk will report the bill.
House File 3302, an act relating to legislative enactments.
There's an amendment. Can we offer that? There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Freiberg and Anderson M. moving to amend House File 3302 as follows. The amendment is coded 1129.
Representative Freiberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is the annual technical corrections bill, which I have been privileged to carry 2 years in a row. To ensure that all of the provisions in this bill and this amendment are truly technical, there are provisions, there are actions set in place to reduce any controversy on them. All of these have been signed off by myself and Representative Mark Anderson, the Republican lead author of this bill, as well as Senator Latz and Senator Limmer in the Senate, and the chairs of the relevant committees. Now, last year when this bill came up, it was about 11:59 p.m. on the day we were scheduled to adjourn sine die, so I only had about 10 seconds to introduce this bill. So I look forward to describing it to members of this body in painstaking, excruciating detail so that you know exactly what's in this bill. And if I'll begin, on second thought, I'd say it's a good bill, just vote for it. Let's take up the amendment first, I guess, though.
There is an amendment at the desk. Discussion to the amendment. All those in favor say aye. All opposed, no. Motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 3302.
Third reading. Any discussion to the bill? Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll. The clerk. Will close the roll. There being 128 ayes and 2 nays, the bill is passed as amended and its title agreed to. Representative Halverson, what purpose do you rise?
Point of personal privilege, Mr. Speaker.
State your point of personal privilege.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to take a moment to remember a member of this body who passed away last year. Pete Nelson was a representative in this body. He was elected in 2002 and served until 2006. And he had many titles throughout his life, and he was known as Representative Pete Nelson here. Back in his hometown of Lindstrom, he was known as Mayor Nelson or Councilman Nelson. To me, he was Uncle Pete, and he was the guy who always had really awesome samples of beef jerky to hand across the counter of our family meat market, and any time that any of us kids showed up. And I'm taking a moment to remember my uncle and his service to the state, because service to the state and service to the community was incredibly important to him, and it was important to his father, who also served in the legislature, and it was important to his uncle, who served in the legislature. And the spirit of service is so important and so deep as a family value, and I know that he was incredibly proud of his service here. Reading his legislative accomplishments, I believe one of the things he's probably proudest of is reducing taxes on all cured meats sold in small meat markets. He was a lifelong service to his community. He served in the Marines. He was founder of the Chisago Lakes Rescue Squad. He was a member of the Police Reserve in the Chisago Lakes area. And as I said, served as mayor and city council, and was one of the folks who helped build what is well known to be a wonderful private institution in Lindstrom, Minnesota, which is the hockey arena. He also ran our family business, which I think is appropriately called Community Market up in Lindstrom. And you can find some of the best ham and sausage ever made in Minnesota in that market. And he was dedicated to the community, he was dedicated to service, and I think it certainly got passed down to our generation as well. They say that there's two things you don't want to see made in this life: laws and sausage, and we've seen a lot of them made in our family, and I'm really proud of his service, and I would like to pass it on over to our hometown of Lindstrom and Representative Barrett.
Representative Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you very much, Representative Halverson. I want to pick up on that line regarding making sausage in legislation, because I'm looking at Representative Nelson's article that we all have when we first come into the legislature, and I want to read to you a quote. Talking about both, he says, I enjoy them both. He said, I take great pride in the quality of sausage I make, and I take equal pride in making quality legislation. Pete Nelson was enshrined in the American Cured Meats Hall of Fame in 1994. He was so much, he did so much. Everyone who knew him knew he had a heart of gold. Also, anyone who shook his hand knew he had a hand of steel. He had hands made of sausages, if anyone remembers when they served with him. But, you know, I want to speak just for a moment regarding his love of legislation and his love of his work at the butcher shop, in which he also had a little pain for those that know he had an accident one time. And it was a really bad accident, and his wife said one time he used one of his 9 lives, and he used a couple more along the way as well. But I want to read you another quote that speaks a lot about him and a lot about the body we serve in. And this was something he said to you guys back on in January 4th of 2005, I believe. Your support shows me we really do matter to each other as individuals. I hope that same degree of respect will continue as we proceed to do the people's business. That's what Pete Nelson was about, the people's business. One other quote from him, and fitting, it's the final words of the article I just read about. This is related to one of his other 9 lives he used at some point. They took out 82 lymph nodes, a bunch of neck and shoulder muscle, and beat me up with radiation. But I'm a lucky guy. God was good to me. God certainly was good to Pete Nelson. He was good to us for letting us know him. Would you join Representative Halverson and me in standing to honor the memory of Pete Nelson? Thank you.
Motions and resolutions. There are copies of the non-controversial motions and resolutions online and at the front desk. If there's no objection, we'll take action on those motions first. Hearing no objection, those motions prevail.
Murphy E. moves that the chief clerk be and is hereby instructed to inform the Senate and the governor by message that the House of Representatives is about to adjourn this 88th session sine die.
Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. That's my motion. It's time to let the Senate know that we're going to go home. I ask for your support.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, no. Motion prevails.
Introduction, Clark and Khan introducing House Resolution number 8, a House resolution concerning the detention and torture of the Somali people in Kenya. The resolution is being referred to the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration.
No action.
Nope.
Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I move that the House adjourn sine die.
Representative Murphy moves that the House adjourn sine die. All in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. All opposed, no. Motion prevails. The House stands adjourned. Sine die.